Hello and welcome to Mystical Sisterhood. I'm Maureen Spielman and I'm here today talking with Valerie Wood. If you are just beginning to tune in to Mystical Sisterhood, my vision is all about bringing together intuitives, healers, and other courageous women to talk about and joy, healing, and revel in community and open up the infinite possibilities in our lives. To that end, Valerie Wood is a phenomenally gifted intuitive angel channel and medium. I have had the pleasure of knowing Valerie for 6 years, meeting with her shortly after my mother died. Also, checking in with her regularly when I went on my healing journey. I have learned so much from you, Valerie, over the
Mhm.
years about angels, spirit guides, and truly owning my own gifts to tap into this realm that I certainly didn't grow up with. I hope that you will find her, as I do every single time we talk, to be so full of light, full of divine truth, full of healing power, and full of joy. Welcome, Valerie.
Oh my God, Maureen, thank you. I think I'm getting a little misty eye over here. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for those kind words. You could probably see I am getting a little misty eye here. So, you know
Yes.
what? I always love talking to you because we always have so much fun. Even though we're talking about some, you know, really deep stuff, we still play in there. And I think it's just, I'm just so grateful to be here and to share that. So,
Yes. Thank you so
mhm.
much for being
Yeah.
here. Just to let our listeners know, I mean, my relationship with you kind of opened up when a local friend
Yeah.
invited you to come and meet on a Sunday morning to meet with a group of individuals individually to tap into angels, spirit
Yeah.
guides. I'm going to let you take the floor on all of that. But it was my first time. And I did have a really open mind to it. And I was familiar with the Akashic records and different modalities of tapping into just all this, all these parts of the unseen world, I think of it as,
Uh-huh.
and things that I certainly didn't grow up with. So,
No.
step by step, as I met different healers and intuitives, my world just grew and expanded exponentially.
Mhm.
So, some of our listeners may have met with a medium or a channeler intuitive before this, but maybe not.
Mhm.
I find your story too of how you learned of your gifts incredibly fascinating. So I invite you to share whatever you feel called to share around how the heck did you discover your gifts?
Yeah, how the heck, right? So
Yeah.
it is kind of funny. So I was in my late 20s and I was probably, we've talked about this before, just like you, right? I was seeking, I was doing different modalities like Reiki, working on my intuition and my connection. And my mom actually found my teacher. And my mom came to me in my late 20s and she had a friend and she was bringing this quote Chandler. And I had never heard of that before, right? And over to her house. And my mom was telling me what channeling is. And I remember thinking, is that real? Do they really do that?
Oh, yeah.
Right? I was like, I had never heard of that. And
Uh,
I'm like, really? And so she's like, well, we're going to find out. And so we went. And I remember sitting across from her. Her name was Elmarilla. And at that point, I was not like an emotional person. You didn't show emotion, you didn't like
mhm.
cry. And I remember sitting in front of her and I just had all these tears like streaming down my face. And I was asking him, like, what is happening here? Right? Like, you weren't saying anything bad to me. And I don't know why I'm just sitting here crying in front of a stranger. Right. And so she was like, nothing. You're just so open to all of the energies.
Wow.
Right. And I
Mhm.
was like, at that point, I kind of knew what energy was, but I was still working with it. I'm like, what the heck does that mean? Right? Like, what energies are we talking about? Right. And so, but I really connected with her. So she became my teacher, but not a channeling teacher. She just
Mhm.
became like my mentor, intuitive, because I just really wanted to open up to anything spiritual or metaphysical. I'd always been into that. Right. And so we had like every year, a group of women in my family would always get together and she would come and have like these weekend long workshops and so forth. And so it was during one of those workshops, it was the Divine Feminine workshop. And I remember this really clearly because we're sitting there. And you know how if you've ever done any mediumship work, and for those of you that haven't, sometimes the people who you're working with, the practitioner will look over your shoulder and be like, so like they're looking at somebody behind you, right? And during the whole workshop, she'd be looking at over my shoulder and just smile and be like, "Who are you looking at?" Like, "Who's there?" And it was during that workshop that I started channeling like spontaneously. So I had
Mm.
worked with energy and I knew what it felt like to be like out of body and so forth. It's not something I ever wanted to do because I was into weird stuff, but I wasn't that weird, right? Like that's really weird. It's true when you're not used to that. And I remember feeling like I was going to be kind of pushed out of my body or pass out, one or the other. It just felt like I needed to go. My spirit needed to go. And I was like, no way in hell am I doing that. Like, that's way out of my comfort zone. I didn't want to do that. And of course, my mom and my aunts, all the women were like, that's great. And my teacher was Marilla was so supportive. She was like, you
Wow.
know what? We've we've learned what channeling is, what it isn't. It's safe for you. Let's do it together. And so I was like, fine. I just assumed that I was going to be channeling who she channeled, and it wasn't angels, right? And so when Archangel Michael came through, which is who I started channeling, I just remember like a big rush of energy, and it felt like a tidal wave hitting me through my back. And I just remember his energy just filling up my whole body and thinking, what the heck is happening? And when
Wow.
she asked him, who's here, I just heard the word Saint Michael. And I was just like, oh my gosh, what do I do with that? Right. And so, and of course, because that's what she did, she was a trance channel. She was able to help me through that for years. And she's since passed away, but she just helps me on the other side now. So
Wow. That's a
it's kind of fun.
fascinating
And
story. Yeah. Go
yeah,
ahead.
and that's actually how I started was before I even started doing mediumship work. I started doing trance channeling and then mediumship, I think all channels do mediumship work. So it's really anyone on the other side, any loved ones and so forth. And that just started coming naturally too, right? It would be like, oh, your grandma's here, your mom's here on top of that. So, that just kind of enmeshed and came naturally with the process. So,
Well, and I love that too, because what I hear
mhm.
you saying is you were into metaphysical teachings. You knew about energy when these gifts came at that point in your life. So that leads me to think that there were signs along the way that were preparing you to discover these gifts.
That you're oh my gosh, Maureen, you know me so well and you're so wise and you're so intuitive in your own right. So that is true. So looking back when I was 21, I actually saw my first angel. And I was with my husband. We were camping, and he's from Chicago, so he was not a camper and so forth. It's the first time we ever gone camping, and we were sleeping in the middle of the night, and I saw this big giant bright light coming up the tent, and I'm like, Mike, wake up, right? Like, and his name is Mike, named after Archangel Michael, if you can believe that, right? Go figure. Talk about serendipity, right?
Yes.
And so I was like, get up. Something's cool is happening out there, right? And he would not get up. And so I unzipped the tent and I was 21. So I was really, really young. And I unzipped the tent and I walk out and above this beautiful tree was this angel that hovered. And I remember thinking, "Oh my gosh, you're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen
Mm.
in my life." And at that point, she showed me a picture of Mike and I. We were probably in our 80s, right? And we were old and we are together. And I remember the only thing that I could think of, I was like, "Oh my God, I look like my grandma." You
That's
see this
too
beautiful
funny.
angel, but then the
Yes.
human part kicks in, right? And you're like, "Oh my gosh, I look like my grandma. Short hair, curly,
Wow.
right?" And I'm like, "Oh
Yes.
gosh, that's what I'm
How
gonna look
beautiful.
like?"
That's so beautiful. And with those
Yeah. Mhm.
experiences, we never forget them. They stay with us. And it really sounds like that brought up a lot of emotion in you and was just such an amazing experience to see that, to witness it.
Yeah, you never forget that. I always
Yeah.
thought at that time, and I still think this is true, but especially at that time, I always thought people had these woo-woo or mystical experiences that they just
Mhm.
didn't talk about,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Especially, I'm in my 50s, so being in your 20s, people didn't really talk about that stuff, right? We didn't have the internet back then. And so I just thought everybody has their own mystical experience. People just don't always share it. So I didn't really think anything about angels after that, right? I'd never really seen angels. And so, you know, fast forward years later, when I'm in my early 30s, that's when I started channeling. I was like, wow. So when you
Hmm.
ask, can you see signs? I can see signs and I can see how all of my past leaded me up to where I needed to be. So,
Yes, yes.
mhm,
Oh, it's so beautiful.
yeah,
I
thank
think
you.
that something that I've learned to tap into over the years, and I
Mhm,
think that you've definitely helped me and other friends working in this realm, is that my intuition is so powerful. And to our listeners out there who are listening to even this conversation about intuition, what do you want them to know? Because I can say for myself, I didn't, again, what I learned as a kid, we weren't talking about intuition a lot. So I feel
yeah,
like a lot of these sort of languages that we're learning as we get older and wiser
yeah,
are really opening us up to gifts and talents and things that we can tap into to get
mhm,
information. But intuition was one of them where you
yeah.
might say, "Oh, Maureen, you're highly intuitive." And I'd look at you and say, "I don't think so," because it wasn't my language to really know that.
No, right? Because we're not brought up with that, right? I think
Hmm.
I almost feel like in school they should teach some type of intuitive development course. So I always tell my clients is, whether I'm channeling or whether I'm connected to their loved ones, they're always like, how do you do that? Right. And, of course, I've been doing it for years. So it's practice. Right. But I always say you have a bit more of a connection to your angels, to your loved ones more than I do. Right. Like they're with you. Right. You just
Yes.
come into the room or on Zoom and I'm connecting with them, but they go with you. You have your own personal connection with them more than me. So you have the ability to tap into them actually easier than me, right? We're just not taught how to do that or what it looks like. And, a lot of us who are seekers or mystical seekers, we read a lot of things, we look on YouTube, and then people have a tendency that says, well, it has to look like that, right?
Hmm.
It has to sound
Hmm.
like that, look like that. And I think the challenge is to find, well, how does it look for you, right? How do you hear it? Do you feel it? And so forth. Like it's always going to be personal to you. So once you kind of tap into that, I think that just gives you a great foundation and then you're well on your way. I mean, you're proof. I mean,
Hmm.
when I met you, I was like, yeah, you are highly intuitive, right? And it's kind
Hmm.
of like when my teacher told me you're so open to the energies. I'm like, what the heck are you talking about?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And
Right.
then when
Hmm.
you work with people
Yeah.
and you feel their energy, your work,
Mhm.
like I know you often work even over phone calls when you do your
Yep.
readings,
Mhm.
are you're tapping into their energy, you're tapping into sort of just how they're operating. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So everything's energy,
Mhm.
right? Even science knows everything's energy. So we have our spirit and our container and our body, right? One of my guides, who's a Japanese goddess, insight, and she talks about the divine spark resides within you in this body, right? And so because of that, what happens is that whenever we're connected to our angels, our loved ones, our spirit guides, and so forth, that spark within inside of us is energy, right? And it kind of pushes out from inside your body and goes out and it seeks, right? So whether it's seeking your mom, your grandma, or
Mm,
connecting with your angels and so forth, and then you start developing a relationship because the energies merge together and
mhm,
they're so you know, there's an exchange of energy. So when you do mediumship, it's an exchange of energy, I would say, like in the middle between two spirits, right? You have the loved one, you have you, and there's an exchange of energy, but you kind of meet in the middle, right? And the
mhm,
loved one's giving you energy, giving you information. So in that energy is information. How you get that information is really personal to you, right? And with channeling, it's a little bit different only because you it becomes more embodied. It feels more physical. It comes into your body, and then you can have that spirit. So it's not you're not channeling a loved ones, right? It's usually some sort of spirit, like an angel or a guide or something, and then they come in your body energetically, right? And then you have an
mhm.
opportunity to either trans channel, where that is just they just kind of like take I don't want to say take over, that's not
Yeah.
the right word because you never really leave. They immerse their energy so much into your physical body that they can just kind of speak to you through you. or you can do more conscious channeling, which I've been doing a lot more of where you're really conscious and you're really present and so forth. So I think the first step with anybody wanting to work with intuition is really just understanding how energy works within your own physical body
Hmm.
and how you're receiving that information, right?
Hmm.
Does that make
Yes.
sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And the
Okay.
way you
Mhm.
describe it with the presencing of how we receive information, whether it's an angel or a spirit guide, someone who's crossed over, is that
Yeah.
it's always around us. I feel like it's just universally surrounds us. So it's there for us. And the
Mm.
one thing that comes to mind too, if I am transparent about my own process,
Yeah.
is that when I was first asked or invited into these conversations, um, I I didn't know my belief systems around it. So
Mm.
it took me some time to cross over that belief system of like, oh, this is real. And I have to
Yeah.
imagine that a lot of people sit straddling the sides before they truly believe. And I think that it's when I crossed over, and I can't even say when that was, but I think it was just exposing myself to the conversations, working with you, just learning and then tapping in to that energy on the other side, that then I began to almost get evidence that it was
Mhm.
real.
That's
Hmm.
true. So
Yes.
that's really normal. That's actually one of the things that I get the most, right? I got this information, I felt it. And so if you're a feeler and empathic, you'll feel it. Or sorry, I felt it, or I just thought it, right? And then they'll be like, is that real? Right? And I hear that a lot, right? And so I have an amazing friend that actually said something to me years ago when we were working on finding her her guide and so forth, her angel and her guide. And we were talking about it. And she said something, and I said something to her, and she's like, I'll buy that for now. And I'm like, that's all you need to do, right? You just
Hmm.
need to buy that for now until you can prove it somehow or somehow validate it, right? And so I always say that, like, just buy it for now, ask them to kind of prove it to you or
Hmm.
validate it somehow. And the more validation that you get, the more excited you get about this, right? And the more you want to know. And so you made a comment, I think that is the key for anyone wanting to do this work is that you have to be curious, right?
Hmm.
So many people will be like, is that real? And I'll say, yeah, it's real, right? I'll tell you what they're saying and give you validation, but you can do this yourself. And then they just stop. They don't get curious enough to take it to the next level. So my biggest advice would be don't stop, get really curious, right? Because the more you do, the more you're going to get, and the more exciting it is.
Hmm.
It's joyful, it's fun, it's playful, right? You always hear about the stories of how it's supporting and healing, and yeah, absolutely, right? But it is fun, and angels have, and your guides, have a great sense of humor. So I'm like,
Yeah.
play,
Hmm.
play, curious and play, right?
Yes, yes, and the willingness, and I love that she said to you, "I'll buy it for now," because
Yeah.
that's all it takes. That's just letting a little bit of that light in, little bit, right? And who knows when we let the light in, how expansive that light can become for us. So that's why I love with your Japanese goddess, just
Yeah.
how you're referring to it as the divine spark
Yeah.
coming from within. It's got
Mm.
so much energy.
It does, exactly, right? So, when I was younger, it was always about like seeking everything out here, right? The divine's outside. They always talked about, you have your spirit inside and so forth. But it's really the focus is out here, right? You meditate is out here. Everything's kind of out here.
Mhm.
And so going through the process, I'm like, yes, your angels are out here, but all of the personal interactions, right? The personal connections, the soul to soul connections, or spirit to spirit connection comes within you, right?
Mhm.
It connects to that spark within you. And then that pushes out into the world. And that's how you express yourself, right? And
Mhm.
that's how you create or go along your journey and so forth. So I love that
I
when
love
she
that
says that.
too.
Hmm.
And it's in my experience, our readings really invite me to come back to myself.
Yeah.
And so when you have read for me, so just giving the listeners kind of an idea of that, and you can talk about it too, but I'll always receive a download of the information you're getting, either from any of your angels or guides. And sometimes my mom will come through or someone who's crossed over. And it always leads back to me, though, in terms of I might put a question out there. And then I love it because here's the part have experienced with you too is that I get off the phone calls and I say, wow, that was an intuitive reading. And Valerie's also like a life coach. It's amazing. Like, I'm like, wait a minute. I just had a coaching session and I thought I was going in for an intuitive reading. But that's because, well, I was going to say it always points back to me, but there's always takeaways too, or there's always something that
Mhm.
I need to go or I'm invited to go look at more deeply. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's so funny. I'll go to you and ask the same question over and over and over. And reliably, you're not remembering the information that you gave me last time. And
No.
it comes up the same. Maybe it's a worry or fear that I have. And I ask you, and then you'll say, oh, they say that that's going to be okay. Or they say this,
Yeah.
and then the takeaways just kind of, the takeaways are always pretty tangible. Hey, take a look at doing this. Here's how you look further into your gifts. Here's how you can practice your gifts. And I think I really agree with what you say. It's that willingness and curiosity. And then when you receive the information, to take it and begin to practice it. I feel like that's really critical too.
I agree. So, 1,000%. So you'll have people who just want you to come and give them information, right? And then they leave, and that's fine because that's all that they need,
Mhm.
right? But I really, really love it. Like where my heart really gets excited is when there are people like you who are curious, right? And then just don't stop at curiosity. They they put into practice, right? And then when they start doing that, it's inevitably that they want to know more, right? Like
Mhm.
that's what always was my journey. You get a little bit, you discover, and you're like, oh, I want to know more. Whether it's about, diving into your belief system, right? Because we all had that. I mean, me too. We're human, and so um, saying, well, what's holding me back? What beliefs hold me back? And the only way to get through that is to do the work, right? And to get curious. And, Michael, the angels, and so forth don't always give homework to everybody. I'm just going to tell you that. Sometimes it's like, no, they don't need to do homework, or it's just too much, right? Whatever they've given in that session is enough for them. And then there are other people, like probably like you, Maureen, and a lot of the people who are going to be watching this who are seekers, who are mystical, sisters, which I love that name, by the way. That's so awesome. Uh, who want like more mystical experiences, who want to have those aha moments, who want to know themselves. So I love it. A young woman, she's wonderful. She's like, I just want to know my soul, right? I want
Mhm.
to know my soul. And oh, that makes me
Yes.
so happy, right? So
Yes.
that's the exciting part. And the beauty of whenever you're doing this work with anybody, whether it's just you and your angels and guides, or whether it's you and a coach or a practitioner or medium or channeler, it doesn't matter. There's always this exchange of energy. And so it's so common that when you're done with the session, you're still feeling that higher vibration. Right, and you get that all the time when you like,
Absolutely.
people leave
Mhm.
like, "Wow, I felt great for, a few weeks," or, what I've like, and I'm just like, because, it's your angels, it's your guides, they have such a high vibration, they love you immensely, and when that love exchanges and comes into your divine spark, right, it stays there.
Mhm.
And so that kind of feels like, wow, I'm just getting a jolt of, plugging into their battery, their energy and system, which I love that,
I
right?
love that too. Who doesn't need that,
Yes,
right?
we all need that.
So,
Yes.
if a
Mhm.
listener was curious
Yeah.
about where to begin, what if it's new to them and where do they begin? What would you recommend?
Oh gosh, so everything's different for everyone, right? So there are some things that are basic. So I'm just, and I just know from my own personal experience. So I'm just going to speak from that. So the way that I started out was I would be looking at signs like outside of myself, right? Like I would ask my angels and guides, I need help with this. And that is a key. You always have to ask, right? People will be like, how about this? And I'd be like, did you ask
Mm,
Archangel Michael, Archangel Raphael, you need a healing, whatever? And they were like, no. And or do you need that parking spot? Like, I
yes.
never get a parking spot. And I'm like, well, did you ask? They're like, no. So that's the key. You always have to ask, right?
Okay.
And
Hmm.
so I would say that. And then so when you ask, right, sometimes things happen right away. And there's a tendency to look for signs outside of us, right? Where we have, the radio comes on and it's a song from our loved one, or it's a words that we needed to hear, right? Or a lot of people will get like animal sightings as symbolism or whatever. And so they usually start looking outside of themselves because it's the mind thinks it's outside of yourself, right?
Okay.
And
Hmm.
then as soon as you start trusting that, the next step I always say is that communication with spirit, because you're in your human body, has to come through all of your senses.
Okay.
So it's right. So it's, oh my God, I had this random, and I always say it this way, it comes randomly. And sometimes it could be really loud, but a lot of times it's really quiet and subtle. So maybe I just had that random feeling coming to me, right? Or in my mind's eye, a picture of, my grandma popped in or my mom or someone, right? And why am I always thinking about her or something? Or you hear, right? And people will be like, well, I don't hear angel voices or my loved ones' voices. I'm like, you do, but it's not a different voice. You know how when we talk to ourselves inside of our
Hmm.
head, which I do a lot, by the way, right? And sometimes I'll answer outside, right? I'll be like, I'll be hearing them and then I'll say something out, out loud. And I'll be like, oh, did I just say that out loud? Right. I think a lot of us do that, but it's your own inner voice. And so, but what happens is that it's just your own voice talking. It just comes randomly, or some people it's just like a download, right? They just feel like, oh, I just know it, right? I just had
Hmm.
that thought that just popped in. I just know it. And the idea is to pause for a moment and to be like, I wasn't thinking about that, right? I was
Yes.
just doing the dishes or driving in my car, grocery shopping or whatever. Why am I all of a sudden getting that feeling, that thought, that vision in my head? But you'll notice that it's all internal. And so when you can go from external science to really listening to your internal senses and not like glossing over it, because we will have a tendency, oh, yeah, I will check in with mom, right? Or I'll do this. But then we get busy as people, right? As
Hmm.
humans, and then we forget about it. And then maybe another download comes or another thought. And it's like, hello, we want you to share this with you. We want you to, go here, do this. So,
Oh, I love that. It
mhm,
reminds me that we're so connected. Just
yeah,
we are just this light, so connected to this realm, and that we get the information in different ways. And
yeah,
sometimes it will come through the overt signs,
mhm,
and those are fun to receive.
yes,
And then, but getting still and getting quiet and listening in. And it feels very empowering for me to think that we could own what those gifts are.
yes.
Hmm. Instead
Ooh,
of that denial
hmm,
that again speak from myself. Oh, Maureen, you have, you're intuitive. You get messages. No, no, no. But then when we can say, like, well, maybe that's true. Maybe I do. It's the same as what you said before.
yeah,
I'll buy it for now. Maybe I do. And then just gathering the ways. I think that I once asked you a question about those voices that come.
mhm,
And I had put a question out to my mom and immediately got back. I had asked, is there anything that any of my siblings need to know? And I had gotten back, your brother needs to see the cardiologist. And like you're describing, I thought, that's ridiculous. What is that? And
yeah, mhm,
I decided to catalog it because I was driving at the time. And I thought, Maureen, go get your parking space and text your brother. And I
mhm.
texted him and he wrote back fairly quickly and said, matter of fact, I just made an appointment. And I remember bringing
I
that one
love
back
that.
to you, and you said, that was information you were getting. And so sometimes it's nice to have someone to bounce it off of too, because
Yeah.
I kind of knew, because then the synchronicity of what the information I had gotten plus what my brother gave back to me told me, oh yeah, that was reliable, and that was some sort
Mhm.
of download or information, or that I was meant to share with someone
Absolutely.
else.
Yeah.
And I think you said that to me one time, but just this element of sometimes, well, we all have the different ways we receive, but sometimes we maybe are a messenger of information. Like that can be one of our
Mhm.
ways that we, or reasons why we receive. Is that right?
Absolutely. So that's actually something I teach in my like basic 101 science class when we're talking about, external science and so forth. And so I actually say at the end is that we ourselves can be the giver of the sign.
Mhm.
Right? So your angels and your guides, your loved ones will use people, including you, right, to give other people messages. Because sometimes, let's face it, we're here, we're bombarded with a million thoughts and things that we have to do, right? Human stuff, that sometimes we just can't get a clear signal or download or hear it or feel it, or we do, we're not paying attention to it, right? We're just ignore it. And they need to use other people to give you the message. Right? And that
Yes.
feels really good when you can do that. So not only is it, excuse me, it's validating for you.
Mhm.
Wow, I am intuitive. I caught that download, right? I listened to it. I paused. I always say you have to pause. I'm pausing. I'm getting curious about it. I'm listening to it. Do I need to do something about it? And obviously, in the case of your brother, absolutely, right? Like that's kind of important. And
Mhm.
so by you being his messenger, it validated you that you can start trusting what you're getting, right?
Yes,
But it's
yes.
also validating to him because maybe he is questioning, do I go now? Do I not go now? Am I okay? And so forth. So you were the messenger. So I always say an exchange of energy that when you're working with your angels and guides, it's never one-sided and it's not always just about you, right? We're all
Okay.
connected. And so they will use you to give messages. And I think that's kind of
Yeah.
fun. It's kind of exciting when that happens.
Yes. So even when we get to the
Mhm.
often people will say, if you think of somebody, maybe reach out. Like that's a sign to reach out. And another thing that you had told me at one point was, especially if you get things, you said one time, yes, two times, double yes, three times, you better do this. Can you say
Yes.
more about that? When signs come up repeatedly, or thoughts, or yeah.
Yes. So if you're like me, I was always, it would take like 3, 4, 5 times, right?
Yes.
And actually, there's a joke going around with me and some close friends for years. It would be like, my teachers would always say, pay attention. So if you're paying attention to the internal information that you're getting, right, you'll be able to uh, hear them, listen to them, go in the direction they need to, whatever it is, right? And so the joke is, I have a message for you. You must not be paying attention, right? So we're human, and
Yes.
I'm just gonna say, even me, I've gotten really good at listening, probably on the first time, but not always, right? But sometimes, if it's something really significant that they want you to know or do or act upon, you're gonna get it. It's repetitive, right? And so that's actually a good question because one of the things clients will say, how do I know if it's a sign from my angels, a guide, or loved ones?
Okay.
And one, it comes randomly, right? It just
Mhm.
comes randomly. Two, it can be repetitive, right? It makes you stop and pause and be like, wow, that was weird. When you get those, ooh, that's
Mhm.
weird.
Mhm.
That's weird, right? You hear that a lot. That's weird. That's strange. Or synchronicities, right? You're at the right place at the right time. Something happens and you're just like, huh. Or you get goosebumps, right? Or you get that, huh. And so those are some things. So, don't worry about it if it takes them 5 times to give you the information. We all do that,
Yes.
me included, right? It just means you're not paying enough attention enough, and they really want you to look at something, right?
Okay. Yes. Yes. And
Yeah.
I love also that you brought up the word synchronicity because
Yeah.
I also think that when I was growing up, we
Mhm.
always used the word coincidence. And
Yeah.
that's sort of a funny one because people were noticing them, but we in no way attributed that to a metaphysical realm or that
Mm.
something on the outside was, oh, that's just by chance. And
Exactly.
so I know you use the word synchronicity a lot. And can you just say a little bit more about that? Because one thing that you said that fascinated me one time was, Maureen, synchronicities don't just happen. You know, your angels and guides are working behind the scenes to orchestrate those synchronicities.
Mhm.
And that made me have a new level of appreciation
Yeah.
for the work being
Mhm.
done on my behalf.
Yeah. You know what? I'm hearing Archangel Michael because that's who my main guide is, right? And he's like, do not, and he's very funny. So for those of you who know that part or don't, he's very funny and sarcastic. When you were talking about angels and guides working on my behalf behind the scenes, it's like Oz, like the Wizard of Oz, right? And so he's like, do you not, he's like, we work hard over here.
Yes.
So that's actually really true because you know what? We don't have their perspective. We're not up here looking down. We don't know all of it, right? We don't have everybody's stories or, see where they're going to go, but they do, right? They're up here. They have a better perspective. And so they will try to put you in a position or a place or be somewhere where you need to go or be in that moment, right? And so if we're not listening to those random or repetitive things, they can't just pick up your body and put you there, right?
Mhm.
You have to, there's some willpower there. And so you have to be able to be like, okay, there's some sort of agreement. I'll go here, right? Or I'll be here and so forth. So,
Oh, I love that.
yeah,
Thank you for
yeah,
explaining that more. It makes me
mhm,
think of, earlier when you said about the parking angels
yeah,
and or asking for a parking spot or asking even the question, what do I need to know today?
yeah.
The part of that where when you do get a response, I want you to talk about how can we show gratitude to how
Mm.
they've supported us because I feel like that's the dialogue. We can't just put a question out. We also have to let them know, like, wow, I so appreciate that. So, can you talk about that?
Absolutely. So I just heard Archangel Michael saying, um, he's very funny. So this is his response, right? One, you could just say thank you, right? Like it's just
Mhm.
a simple thank you, I'm grateful. But then, which you heard me kind of chuckle a moment ago, he was like, to really thank us, if there's something that you need to do it, right? Like if we're saying you should try this or call that person or something, it's going to be in your benefit or someone
Mm.
else's benefit, right?
Mhm.
So, sometimes it's just a simple thank you. That's all, right? And he's just saying, and you don't even have to say it out loud. You don't even have to say thank you in your head. It's just your intention that your heart is like pushing out and just saying, I'm grateful. Like, oh my gosh, right? And so but if there's something that you need to do, right?
Mhm.
He's like, do it. That's how it can make it. He's like, you'll make our lives easier. he's,
Yes.
he's joking, but there's truth to that, right?
Yes, I love it. It's to me, it's become more and more of an ongoing conversation or an
Yeah.
ongoing availability on my behalf. And
Yeah.
maybe one of the last things that is coming to mind for me is just that idea that we are multidimensional beings and what might our listeners learn about that to kind of almost like cohesively tie it together? Because I think the way that most of us were brought up was mainly in the mind. We knew we had a body. We may have practiced a religion, but sort of bringing all of those things together,
Mhm.
just wasn't the framework that I sort of knew about when I was growing up. And I'm so grateful to be learning in this phase of my life. But I think that that's an important kind of way to view ourselves and know ourselves.
Mhm. So you're right. That's actually how I grew up, right? I always thought that I'm just an ordinary girl, right? Who there's nothing really completely extraordinary, right? I just grew up very normal, I guess you would say, right? Nothing stands out. I wasn't like good at this or good at that. And so Michael's had a saying for years that I love to say is that it's hard for humans to give up the perception of who they think they are, right? You
Yes,
have a hard time giving up what you perceive yourself to be, right? And so when we grow
absolutely.
up, we create this identity. And it's not a spirit problem. Your spirit knows who you are. It's a mind problem,
Mhm.
right? The mind is part of the body. And so the mind only knows you and your personality from things that you've experienced, things that you've experienced, things that you've seen, heard, felt, all of these things growing up. And that's how the mind starts to identify itself. Right. And so for like me, and I'm sure a lot of everyone else out there, right? It's just, I'm not intuitive, right? I don't have
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
ability because the mind has never had that experience to look at that or to an experience to really understand that.
Yes.
So I would
Mhm.
say, are we multidimensional people? Absolutely. Your spirit knows that, right? We are connected to everyone and everything here and out there, right?
Mhm.
Our spark
Yes.
is, and so
Yes.
forth. And really, it's just our willingness to give up what perceptions we have about ourselves that will help us drive forward and have that spark get, bigger and bigger. I think of like the fire within, right? Just burning brighter. So you can
Yes.
burn brighter,
Yes.
right? Shine brighter, be more of who your spirit actually is. It's just kind of getting out of our head and getting rid of that, oh, I'm ordinary or I'm not intuitive, right? That's never happened to me before,
Mhm.
right? So I can't
Mhm.
do that now. And we label ourselves as, right? We're the daughter, the sister, the friend, the mother, whatever it is. So we put ourselves
Yes.
in those boxes. And while those things are true,
Mhm.
those who we are so much more than that. And I think that divine spark within us is really about discovering who you are as a spiritual being on top of all of those other things, right? And then some of the things that don't serve you anymore, your perception of quote being ordinary. If that was me, if you were talking to me, that would have been
Right.
my block,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
I'm ordinary. Only like, saints are really, good people do this kind of
Mhm.
stuff, right?
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Right?
Oh, I
Right? I have
mhm.
those thoughts. I'm not that good, right?
Mhm. Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you for that for myself and for the listeners because the word that comes to mind is limitless. And
Yes.
that when we even paint the picture of what's available to us, what's possible for us, and then just joining hands in this sisterhood, in community, in support of one another. It's just so beautiful. So I
Yes.
loved our talk today.
Me too.
And Valerie, if the listeners want to follow you, discover more about you, where would they find you?
They can go to my website, valerie-wood.com, and it's VALERIE hyphen wood, WOOD.com. So Valerie has different spellings, so I always like to spell it out, right? So
Yes,
yeah,
yes. And
can go,
then
yeah.
you
Mhm.
mentioned that do you sometimes do workshops, individual readings? How do you do your work?
Ah, yeah, so for personal one-on-one readings, it's either in person, over the phone, or Zoom. And energy is energy because some people will be like, "Can you read me over the phone without seeing me?" And I'm like, "Yeah, energy is energy, right? It doesn't matter. It's
Yes.
just an exchange." And so, and yes, and I have classes, I have workshops. I'm going to be doing, I think, at the beginning of the year, maybe every something different every month. So whether it's like Sundays with the angels or a night with Benzaiten, my Japanese goddess, or meditation. So we have some fun things hopefully
Beautiful.
planned for the new year. So
Okay.
thank you so much,
Yes.
Maureen. This is
Thank
so
you so
always
much.
exciting and
Yes.
fun. I could keep going with you. It's just
I
you are
know.
my sister, my mystical sister. So
We'll have to do a part 2 at some time, but thank you
yeah.
for
Oh
being
my
here.
God.
Thank you to our listeners for tuning in to Mystical Sisterhood and just
Yeah.
learning what we're all about. I feel like we touched on joy today. We touched on healing. So, that being said, thank
Mm.
you, Valerie.
Oh my
I
God. Thank
so
you,
appreciate it.
Maureen.
Yes.
I appreciate you deeply. So
Thank you.
thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of Mystical Sisterhood. To learn more about my one-on-one coaching programs or join the Mystical Sisterhood membership, visit maureenspielman.com or mysticalsisterhood.com. Thanks so much. I'll see you in the next episode.